So you want to play some of your retro consoles, but maybe you don't have an original CRT to hook them all up the way they used to be back in the 80s and 90s. Today, there's a lot of options when it comes to playing retro games. And there's also a lot of options of hooking up the original hardware so you can experience it as close as possible to the original experience, but on your modern equipment. Now, me personally, I always prefer using a CRT when it comes to playing 8-bit and 16-bit generation consoles, but sometimes it's nice to be able to hook these things up on a modern TV, on a high definition television, and get a nice looking picture from these games. Well, today I want to talk to you about multiple ways that you can accomplish this with any of your modern equipment, anything that really hooks up with an HDMI connection, and you can still experience your original cartridges from things like your NES, your Super NES, an N64, a Sega Genesis, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about it all here down in the Matcave. Let's get to it.
Oh, welcome to the Matcave, where the old games never fade. Stack of great cards, glowing CRT. Welcome to the Matcave, heartbeats in 8-bit waves. You can plug in, you can still play free. Keep the pixels bright, pass the pad tonight. Every level cleared keeps the legends alive. If the future's loud, let the past still play. Safe, I'll say, in the Matcave. In the Matcave. In the Matcave. Welcome to the Matcave.
Before we get into hooking up these retro consoles in a modern way, let's talk about how I have it hooked up the original way, connected to a CRT television. Now, depending on the console, you may need to use a different type of hookup, but in most cases, you're either using an RF coaxial hookup or using the RCA cables and a composite video cable, which is 9 times out of 10 the way it's going to be with most of these consoles. Now, when it comes to the Nintendo Entertainment System, the original NES, my model is the one with the RF hookup. So I have that running through a channel 3 loop on the coaxial connection directly to the CRT TV. The rest of the consoles here, the Super Nintendo, the N64, and we'll get to the PS1, the Sega Saturn, and the Dreamcast in a little bit, but these original systems here, also as well, if it's off camera right now, but the Sega Genesis along with the Sega CD and the 32X, all using the RCA hookups with a composite video connection, goes into the RCA inputs of the CRT. Now, when you have the one television, there might only be one input, or maybe two inputs depending on the model. But in most cases, you're going to want to have some sort of a switcher to make it nice and convenient for you from going back and forth between the systems. And in that case, you can get things like a composite video switcher that includes the RCA analog audio jacks. And you can connect this to one input on the TV and then use the buttons to switch between your consoles. And at any moment, you can switch to the other system, like from the NES to the Super Nintendo, or from the Super Nintendo to the Sega Genesis. Now, something a lot of people struggle with when it comes to these retro consoles is powering them all up at the same time. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, there was a bit of a problem when it came to the power cables because they weren't always just a small connector. A lot of them had a very large brick that takes up a lot of space. So you got to make sure that you have your power set up in a comfortable way that all of these power plugs are going to fit. One of the biggest culprits in this setup is the Tower of Power Sega connections. Each one of those Sega consoles, the Genesis, the Sega CD, and the 32X add-on, all have very large power bricks and they take up a lot of space. So I have an entire power strip dedicated to just the Sega. So when you're hooking up your retro systems, make sure you keep power management in mind. Now, having a video switcher comes in handy when you want to be able to have multiple systems hooked up, and having something that you can control easily whenever you want to switch consoles is a nice convenience. So let's say we were playing some Super Nintendo when we were playing some Donkey Kong Country, but maybe we were done with it and we wanted to switch over to the Sega CD. At the click of a button, I can switch that, hit the power on my Sega CD, and fire this up. And it's really nice because at any moment I can switch back and forth to these systems. And it's just that easy. With the press of a button, you can go back and forth to any console that you want to play that's connected to that video switcher. I highly recommend them with any retro setup. But what about when you want to take that retro experience from a CRT to a widescreen high definition experience? Well, that's where you have to change up your entire setup, and that's where a lot of options come into play. So now you want to take your retro experience and bring it to a modern world, and maybe you even want to capture it for the sake of your YouTube channel. Well, that's where a bunch of things come into play, and if you want to be able to experience these original cartridges through a high definition pathway, you got to choose the right equipment. And when I tell you there are a ton of options out there, I am not kidding. They range in quality and price. So it all comes down to what your preference is. So make sure you do plenty of research in it before you purchase any additional equipment to capture your original retro games. So in today's episode, I want to tell you about one wire that can be a solution for 3 of your retro consoles, all made by Nintendo. And this one wire can be used on all 3 systems without any other additional adjustments. It is the proprietary end that will fit all 3 of these consoles, and the other end is an HDMI to connect to your system, whether you're going to be capturing it for live streaming, capturing gameplay, or just connecting it to your high definition television to play it. So let's take a look at one of the adapters I use in my setup. This one wire is made by HYPERKIN, and the proprietary end that's on here will fit the Super Nintendo, the N64, and the Nintendo GameCube. The other end of the adapter goes out to an HDMI, which connects to your high definition television setup. The other thing I really like on this adapter is the switch, where you can either maintain the 4:3 aspect ratio or stretch it to 16:9, whichever version you prefer. This adapter also requires power via a USB connection. This adapter outputs a 720p resolution to your high definition monitor and maintains a stereo audio output. This type of an adapter is one that I prefer because, one, it doesn't break the bank, it really doesn't cost all that much, and it really does get the job done. Now, there certainly are some more high-powered, more in-depth, up-converting adapters out there from multiple companies, which I'm sure do a great job, but in my particular case, this did everything I needed it to do, and I use it all the time. I'll have an Amazon link down in the description for this HYPERKIN adapter that'll work with your Super Nintendo, your N64, and your Nintendo GameCube. Now, those of you that have been here on the channel for a while, you know that there is another solution that I use to play my retro games, and that is in the form of a third-party console also made by HYPERKIN. Here on the channel, we have played a whole lot of retro cartridges, and most of the time when I am live streaming those games with all of you here at the Matcave gaming community, I'm using the HYPERKIN Retron 5 to capture those games. And we have showcased the menu and some of its features on prior streams and videos, but I'm going to show you a couple of those things here today to give you an idea of what this alternative to just a wired adapter can do for you in your high definition setup. The HYPERKIN Retron 5 is built to handle your NES, Super NES, Famicom, Sega Genesis, and Game Boy games. That's right, it will play Game Boy games. In fact, there is even an adapter to add even more games to it, where you can then pop in this adapter to the Sega Genesis port, and now you can play Sega Master System games, Game Gear games, and even the card slot is there for the Sega Master System card slot games. It's a pretty amazing system, and it's one of my favorite additions to my entire collection. It definitely helps keep retro gaming alive. So now that we have the HYPERKIN Retron 5 set up, let's use one of the most iconic systems ever in the 16-bit era, the Super Nintendo, as the example for today. Now, like I said, this system plays your original cartridges for multiple systems, but we're going to use a Super Nintendo cartridge as the test, and I thought, why not use the iconic Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo? So, just like you would with your normal Super Nintendo, you'd pop the cartridge out. There you have it, and you're going to pop it into the top loader slot for the Super Nintendo on the HYPERKIN Retron 5. Once you pop the cartridge in, it's going to load it up, and you're going to be prepped and ready to go. But you want to make sure that you're ready with a controller. Today, we're going to use a Super Nintendo controller because there are ports on the system for a Super Nintendo controller, an NES controller, and even a Sega Genesis controller. And there are 2 ports for each. That way, you can play co-op. Now that we have the game loaded, before we fire it up, I want to take you through a little bit of the menu here on the HYPERKIN Retron 5 so you get an idea of what this system is able to do and how you can adjust it to your preference for the gameplay. Before hitting the A button to play, we're going to head over to settings here in the main menu, and this is where we start to be able to adapt everything from the video image all the way to the audio and even map controllers. The image filters let you do very similar things like any emulation would, where you could choose different filter types and each one will adjust the image to either sharpen the image, smooth it out, maybe give it a little bit of a softer feel, give it a crisper feel. In my particular case, I leave the image filter to none because I personally don't like those adjustments with the filters. I like to get the image exactly what it's going to be right from the cartridge and sending it over that HDMI to a 720p resolution. And I don't mind the character models looking pixelated because that's what they're supposed to look like. So that's my personal preference. But if you like these filters, there are a ton of choices on there. You can also choose to maintain scan lines during the gameplay. And to give you an idea of what it looks like, we will see it when we fire up the game. But to give you an idea, you can even apply the scan lines to the menu. And then there you have it. You have some scan lines on the main menu. I just leave it off for the menu here, but I like to have it on during the game. In the case of the Retron 5, I really do like how they handle the simulation of scan lines. It's one of the best versions of it that I personally have ever seen, and it gives it a nice, comfortable look, maintaining a bit of a retro feel. So I really like it. You can also adjust the aspect ratio. I just keep it to normal, but you can stretch it out. You could zoom it in, and like I said, normal is where I keep it, where it's going to maintain the 4:3 aspect ratio on there. You can also adjust the screen refresh rate. Now, I always keep it to match game, but you can force it to 60 hertz or even to 50 hertz, but I keep it to match the game to get as best performance out of it as possible. When it comes to audio adjustments, you can enhance it overall. You can increase the bass, you can increase the treble, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of mess around with it to find your personal preference. In my case, I just leave these off and the game outputs the way it does, and I haven't had any problems with it. When it comes to controllers, the HYPERKIN Retron 5 does come with a controller that charges up and will work wirelessly. Personally, I do not like this controller and I really never use it. It has an analog stick that kind of acts like a D-pad and it's very, very clicky. You can hear the clicking as I move that, and the button layout is not the best. I've never been very comfortable utilizing this controller. It does have the shoulder buttons and everything, but it's nice that it comes with a pack-in controller, but this is certainly not my preferred way to use the system. HYPERKIN does make alternate controllers that mimic Super Nintendo controllers, Sega Genesis, and even the NES and Master System, so there's plenty of options out there. You could also use the original controllers from the original hardware. And when it comes to the controllers, you can customize the buttons and you can map them however you like. Personally, I just leave it as is because I want the game to play as it was meant to play, but you can set it to whatever your preference is. And now I'm going to show you some gameplay of Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo playing on the HYPERKIN Retron 5. And here we go, we get our normal startup, and you can already see the scan lines there. And there you have it, Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo, upscaled to 720p over an HDMI connection using the HYPERKIN Retron 5. And the game will play exactly as you expect it to play. In fact, it plays phenomenal. I have never experienced any controller lag with these games. I have a great experience with it, especially using a wired controller every time out. So let's jump into the game itself. And we'll just go ahead and load up one of my save files here that I had prior on here. So here we are, we're on Donut Ghost Island. And we could jump over to this level and just fire it up. And as you can see, we have Super Mario World playing through a high-definition port. And it captures so well here on the system. So whether I'm live streaming the game or I'm just capturing it for an edited video, like in this case, I can work with it in any way I like. And it brings back all of the nostalgic memories that I had growing up in the 90s. This was one of those systems that I didn't have a Super Nintendo growing up. I was a Sega kid, so now I have a Super Nintendo as an adult, but I did get to experience these games with friends and family members that had the system. So I just wanted to show you that the game through the HYPERKIN works just like you would expect it to. The color looks great, the brightness looks great, and as you saw, I really didn't do anything to adjust any of it. This is exactly how it's going to output. As I jump down a hole, this is exactly how it's going to output, just popping the cartridge in and pretty much leaving the settings to default for the most part. And I'll tell you, I have fallen in love with this system pretty much immediately when I first got it, to the point where I was so happy with it, I actually bought a second one for another setup in the house. It's also a great way to share these retro games with the next generation, whether it's your kids, your family members' kids, your friends' kids. Show them these games, show them how cool they were, and you can just easily hook it up to any TV in the house, and everyone can have fun and play together using the original cartridges and even the original controllers. So there you have it, a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at how I set up my system here down in the Matcave, whether I'm playing on an original CRT TV or upscaling it on other hardware or using an adapter so that I can bring that gameplay to you here on the channel. There's so many ways you can go about this and so many other adapters out there. And in the next episode, we're going to take a look at some of those more advanced adapters for later consoles, but staying in the world of retro. Until next time, everybody, remember, keep retro gaming alive, because one day your games will be retro too. I'll see you on the next one.